housing yesterday. It's 180 residential care beds and 230 dependent living units. At the heart of this is collaboration. The University of Canberra teach a lot of allied health professionals, we teach nurses. We've got a research centre specifically about ageing. So we thought we'd use the land of the campus productively. We've got a training hospital, which is great for local people. And by putting in the aged care facility, we can use our land productively. It'll generate jobs in construction and ongoing operation jobs. But best of all, it means that our workforce, when they're studying, will be able to do integrated work learning at the same time as doing their sort of book work. And this just means better skilled graduates when they're finished. So it's got multiple dimensions. And of course, to wrap it all together, people living here, they'll be living on the university campus, which is, I think, a great intergenerational experience for everyone.
We know that most Australians who need support when they age are in their own homes rather than in residential care. What about the reverse thinking, and that is rather than bringing older Australians to the campus be going more out to the community?
Oh, listen, there's no doubt, you're 100% right, that people being able to grow old in their own homes is the preferred option. I don't think this is going to replace that, but I think when you look at the independent living propositions here, it does give the ability for people to downsize those 3 and 4 bedroom houses, which helps with housing affordability more generally, which is an issue in Canberra suburbs like everywhere else in Australia, so that's good. We'll also be, through our training, mean that we'll be able to deliver more qualified graduates who can do home care, and we'll also be doing outreach from both the research we do at the university, but also there'll be home services available in this complex.
How important do you think it is for health professionals, even if they're not going to specialise in that area, to be literate or aware in the needs of ageing Australians?
It's crucial. Listen, as you observed, I've been in politics for 18 years and I've been Vice-Chancellor for 10 months. But one of the great things about the University of Canberra, which attracted me to apply for the job here, is that they're a vocational university. So it's a big part of the educational philosophy at UC. It's not exclusive to the University of Canberra, but it's certainly a hallmark of UC, is that work integrated learning. If in each year that some students doing a course here for a professional vocation, they can do training on the tools, it helps immensely with their employability, with the breadth of their experience. And I think it's better for their learning if some points during each year and semester they're out there in the real world. And it helps the penny drop about, oh, that's why we're studying this. And our aged care research units here at UC are world class too, so we're doing a lot of aged care research about the best techniques.
We've had some comments from economist Chris Richardson urging the government to take more action on reforms, particularly given the size of its majority that it won in the last election. Is this a time for a Labor government to be ambitious?
Well, some things can change, and Chris Richardson's giving advice to the government, which I'm sure they're grateful. I think they are doing a range of things. It's not my job to be a salesperson for the government, but in the university context, what Jason Clare's doing, they've been pretty ambitious. We've got to have the overdue discussion about reforming the Jobs Ready graduate program, the unloved policy child of the Morrison era. But they're reducing HECS debt. They're also moving to needs-based funding and managed growth in universities.
What about big tax reform?
Oh, well, people had a chance for some big tax reform in 2019 and didn't, and 49% of people wanted it. No, I'm not going to give advice to the government on what they need to do there. There's no doubt in my mind that income is taxed too heavily in Australia and property is taxed too lightly. But, I've earned my legislative spurs and now trying to help create a modern, contemporary, relevant university.
And you were just listening to University of Canberra Vice-Chancellor Bill Shorten. Thank you very much for listening to The Breakfast Wrap today. Every interview was presented by Sally Sarah, produced by the ABC Radio National Breakfast team, and The Breakfast Wrap was produced by Josie Scott. I'm Lexington Dunton, and we'll see you tomorrow for another day of The Breakfast Wrap.
Thank you, Luke. More Breakfast Wrap for you tomorrow morning at 11:30-ish. The best bits of ABC Radio National Breakfast plucked out for you and arrayed on a platter like rockmelon wrapped in prosciutto, or little chunks of cheddar and cabana on toothpicks, depends on the day. 2 minutes to 12.
It is a truth universally acknowledged that on one's 250th birthday, there should be weekdays at 10 on ABC Radio National or anytime on the ABC Listen app.
They prayed, they preached, they rebelled. From God Forbid, this is the Religious Rebels podcast. The stories of people who defied empires and sometimes paid with their lives. From Joan of Arc's battlefield visions to Malcolm X's final revelation, we tell the stories of those who defied faith and remained. Religious Rebels, the original Disruptors. Search for God Forbid ABC wherever you get your podcasts or on the ABC Listen app.
Hello there, Hilary Harper with you today on ABC Radio National, broadcasting from Naarm, Melbourne. Where you live, is it a rude question to ask someone where they went to school? It is a bit of a loaded question in some parts of the country. It has all this baggage about money and class and prestige, even assumptions sometimes. In some areas, of course, there is no choice. You go to the local school or boarding school perhaps, and for some of us there's no choice financially. But is our education system broken? Some argue that it provides choice and others say that it entrenches inequality. And that is the discussion ahead for you on Big Ideas today on ABC Radio National. Fran Kelly will join us too a bit later to tell us why she and Patricia Carvelis are leaving the studio next Tuesday, blinking in the daylight like moles, to bring you the party room on plain air. That's like public school education coming out right there. It's 12 o'clock, time to bring you up to date with the latest in ABC News.
ABC News, hello, I'm Simon Lauder. The Bureau of Statistics has released its latest inflation figures. They're a bit higher than expected. Here's finance reporter David Chow.
The price of goods and services rose 3.8% in the year to October, according to new figures from the ABS. Now that's much higher than the 2 to 3% inflation that the Reserve Bank is targeting, meaning the chances of an interest rate cut in the months ahead are looking increasingly unlikely. A major driver of inflation was housing, up nearly 6%, as well as electricity costs, which surged 37% in 1 year. That was due to the expiry of energy rebates for states like Queensland and WA, which were keeping prices artificially low this time last year.
Vandals who cut through copper cables are being blamed for an Optus outage affecting more than 14,000 services southeast of Melbourne. Natasha Shapova reports.
Optus customers in the Frankston and Mornington Peninsula areas have been unable to call 000 unless they're within coverage of another mobile network or make a Wi-Fi call. Technicians have been on site since early this morning for repairs, with Optus's Jane McNamara expressing her frustration at copper thieves, who she says are regularly targeting telecommunications infrastructure.
What is very fortunate is that other telecommunications providers' infrastructure hasn't been impacted.
Optus says calls to 000 have been successful and 5 of the 6 sites have so far been restored.
US President Donald Trump says his plan to end the war in Ukraine has been fine-tuned, and he's sending his envoy Steve Witkoff to meet the Russian leader in Moscow next week. Linda Gruen reports.
Mr. Trump says he could eventually meet with Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, but not until further progress has been made. His comments come after his army secretary, Dan Driscoll, held talks with Russian officials in Abu Dhabi and will next week speak with Ukrainian negotiators. President Trump says he will be briefed on all progress made along the way. His peace plan for ending the nearly 4-year war emerged last week, heavily favored Russia, prompting talks between Ukrainian and American officials. Mr. Zelensky has since said that a common understanding has been reached. Moscow is yet to agree to the fine-tuned version, but made clear that it might not accept it.
The Therapeutic Goods Administration is cracking down on vitamin B6 after it was linked to a rise in toxicity cases causing nerve damage to many Australians. From June 2027, pharmacist supervision will be required for the purchase of products containing more than 50 milligrams of B6. Products with more than 200 milligrams will need a prescription. Urologist Professor Matthew Kiernan says it's an important decision by the TGA.
And I think it's also raising awareness. So I don't think things can be, bought off the shelves of chemists without knowledge. And so I think once you're going to high doses of any vitamin replacement, this should be done with consultation with your doctor and obviously
For the first time in decades, the coalition has lost its perceived advantage on economic management, according to a leading academic study released today. Casey Bridge reports.
It's a long-held political adage believed by voters that the coalition is the better party in economic management. But this year's Australian election study, a long-running survey conducted after each election, has found that advantage evaporated this year. Of the 10 policy areas studied, voters preferred Labor's offering in 9 of them, with the coalition only having the advantage on national security. The researchers say it's unprecedented to have one party dominate so many policy areas. The study also found Peter Dutton was the least liked leader in its nearly 40-year history.
The Rural Fire Service is warning catastrophic fire conditions could destroy millions of dollars worth of crops and machinery across New South Wales. More from Xanthi Gregory.
The RFS has now ordered farmers in 17 local government areas across central, southern and western New South Wales to immediately stop harvesting operations and check their local conditions due to the risk of fires. The lower Central West Plains, which includes areas like Forbes, Grenfell, Dubbo and Narromine, are facing a catastrophic danger level today with high temperatures and strong winds forecast. These areas are subject to total fire bans, while 10 other regions, including Hunter, Illawarra and Greater Sydney, are subject to an extreme fire danger warning. The RFS says the weather is continuing to deteriorate and it has detected more than 50,000 lightning strikes during the last 2 hours.
Warnings are in place for parts of New South Wales, South Australia, WA and the NT. You're listening to ABC Radio National.
12. Hello, I'm Hilary Harper, coming to you from the lands of the Kulin Nation in Melbourne. We spend a lot of money on education in Australia, collectively, as taxpayers. Some of it goes to public schools and some of it goes to private schools or independent schools. Regardless of how you feel about that distribution, the school system doesn't seem to be doing what it's meant to. Various education metrics show achievement is slipping, which means kids are being let down and teachers are fleeing the system, which again has big impacts all around. Jane Caro is an activist for public schools and she's going to share her thoughts on all of this with you for Big Ideas today on ABC Radio National. She says there's a much bigger problem than just tweaking the life chances of a few students, important though that is. She says it affects mental health and social fragmentation more widely. Hello, Natasha Mitchell here with Big Ideas, our live event show on ABC Radio National and the ABC Listen app. You know that question, where did you go to school? Or for parents, it often goes like this, where will your kids go to school? It's a vexed question because it's often loaded with assumptions and stereotypes and value judgments. So how do you answer it?
Children and now my grandchildren all attended non-selective, bog-standard public schools from kindergarten to year 12. I've been to university perfectly. I was told by everybody that I signed my kids up for, you know, a public high school in an incredibly wealthy, leafy area, that I was condemning them to a life of drug dealing and prostitution. You laugh, I'm not kidding. Unfortunately, they were wrong because drug dealing and prostitution, I believe, are quite profitable. But it was quite extraordinary to listen to the kind of talk about schools. In many parts of the world, going to your local public school is pretty much just a norm, not a parental choice. In Australia, school choice has been elevated to the norm, backed by government policies and but at what cost? Today on Big Ideas, author, former advertising executive, Walkley Award-winning columnist and popular social commentator Jane Caro on Australia's school divide and how we've come to have one of the most segregated school systems in the developed world. Amongst her many books is What Makes a Good School. She co-authored with former secondary school principal Chris Bonner.
Jay was invited to give this 2025 Dymphna Clark Lecture, named after the linguist and educator who died in the year 2000 on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country at Manning Clark House in Canberra. Here is Jane Caro and heads up a few swear words ahead.
I went to my 50th school reunion last year. The high school I attended, to my great good fortune, was and still is a box standard public high school in the back blocks of Sydney's northern beaches. I was part of the class of 1974. I remember my time there fondly. It was in the days when public schools were the only schools receiving public funding. She was a hippie back in the day and had been an anti-vaxxer for as long as I could remember, but apart from that nonsense, I'd always thought of her as a good and reasonable person, until I discovered at that reunion that she had descended into the quagmire of QAnon and was now a transphobic climate change denier, a conspiracy theorist and a Trump supporter. I now believe anti-vaxxing is in fact the gateway drug for Trumpism. After all, if you can deny one set of scientific facts, I guess you can deny them all. Maybe you even have to. Maybe if you're going to say that evidence isn't true, then you have to say no evidence is true. I pushed back against her arguments as calmly as I could until eventually she lost her cool. I promise you, she who lost her cool, it wasn't me. With a mulish look on her face, she said, "I'm not like you, Jane. I don't read everything and then decide that I am right." I think she meant that as an insult, by the way. I always thought it was what you were supposed to do. She continued, "I just have a feeling." And there we have it. Many of those who voted against the force, many who respond to accusations of being racist by displaying their hood, even shedding tears, those who sputter about identity politics or misandry when confronted about attitudes to women or LGBTQI people, they are angry because your objection to their prejudices has made them feel bad. They have been told for decades now that their feelings are as valid as any facts. This feelings versus facts worldview has created a chasm. Those who've been encouraged to prioritise and legitimise their feelings, no matter what, and those who are clinging tenaciously to evidence, facts and reason, which doesn't mean they don't have feelings, but occasionally they say to themselves, maybe that's just my stupid feeling. I'm entitled to have it, but I'm not entitled to use it as the basis on which to treat other people or as a worldview. In my view, this chasm was the inevitable result of neoliberalism, a pernicious philosophy I object to from the first minute I first realised what it was. It is, of course, the worship of the rights of the individual above the rights of the community, the rights of the market, which is the only community that it actually recognises, which as someone who worked for 35 years in advertising agencies, I understand what a market is. It's a vehicle of exploitation and commerce. It's not a community. Okay? Okay. My right versus our responsibility, or my individual feelings versus your collective evidence. As is being said increasingly now, everyone is entitled to their own opinion. What they've missed is that does not entitle them to their own facts. Don't get me wrong, there are many situations where individual rights matter a great deal. everyone else, particularly when all the evidence is against them. And this is what a slavish commitment to the individual over the collective has created. Just like a slavish adherence to the rights of the collective over the individual led to gulags and oppression, so it's opposite. Freedom pendulum swinging too far, if you like, has led to alligator Alcatraz and oppression. This idea that whatever you get in this life to your responsibility is the philosophy of the already advantaged and the wealthy, and the emotionally immature. Mostly it seems, I'm afraid to say this, and I excuse everyone in this room, unless you feel yourself to be different in question time, it seems the white, the male, and one's well educated. I have watched this philosophy wreak havoc on all sorts of sectors in our society. I have watched with increasing dread our tax base, public services, public assets, the inability to tackle climate change, the rise of the consultant, the gig worker, and the casualisation of work and the marginalisation of the vulnerable. It is a philosophy that divides the world into winners and losers. So is it any wonder that it and its delinquent younger brother libertarianism has created a society which is becoming nastier, crueler, and more bigoted, but also fragile, stressed out, and terrified.
Jay Caro, author, commentator, former advertising industry executive, on the state of the world as she sees it. Here on ABC Radio National's Big Ideas, I'm Natasha Mitchell. Jane is using this 2025 Dymphna Clark Lecture at Manning Clark House in Canberra to shine a spotlight on what she sees is the erosion of Australia's public education system.
A sector very close to my heart tragically illustrates the destruction 3 decades of neoliberalism has wrought. I have watched in real dismay, in real pain, as this pitiless view of society has absolutely gutted Australia's public education system, of which I remain both a proud product and a committed supporter. It is neoliberalism that has put parental choice at the centre of Australia's education system. It is neoliberalism that has drained the joy and the affordability out of early childhood education, out of schools and post-school education. And tragically, Australia has guzzled the neoliberal blandishments around education much more greedily than any other comparable country. We are alone in the way we differentially educate our children. What has happened to us, and particularly to our most vulnerable and most needy young people, could be used as an awful warning about what to avoid when planning an education system. Instead, it is becoming a model, at least for Trump's America. What the far-right Christian nationalist Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 recommends for US schooling is similar to what Australia has enjoyed for the past 25 years. They recommend a voucher system, so beloved of those who either cannot understand or despise the difference between equality and equity. Australia already has an ersatz voucher system, with the public money going to schools rather than direct to parents. The zero-sum game of neoliberalism, the idea that for you to rise, others must fall. Remember Scott Morrison's remark about wanting to see women rise, but not at the expense of men. Not sure whose expense. Anyway, it's not going to that. It's just a bloody stupid thing to say. Has had terrible effects on our education system. Parents have been persuaded that unless they buy the best education they can afford, freedom, after all, now meaning freedom to choose in a market, their child will be doomed to be left behind, or fall through the cracks, or get in with the wrong crowd. I've always been fascinated at how the wrong crowd are always orphans. No one's ever the parent of anyone in the wrong crowd. heads of other kids to get ahead has been a very important part of the divide and conquer mentality we now find ourselves facing. What's that old shibboleth? The society divided against itself can only fall. Well, we have divided our children every which way over the last quarter century, and we are now reaping what we sowed. Our children are divided, especially when they get to secondary school, by gender, by religion, by academic ability or lack thereof, and increasingly by musical, sporting and dramatic ability. We increasingly put Muslim kids with Muslim kids, Jewish kids with Jewish kids, Catholic kids with... Actually, no, that's not working. There's hardly any Catholics in Catholic schools anymore. Let me go on. Smart kids with smart kids, dumb kids with dumb kids, and most damaging of all, rich kids with rich kids and poor kids with poor kids. Ross Gittins made a bleak joke recently when he asked, what did the Barker boy say to the poor kid? Nothing. They never met. And that's where we're at. Oh, of course, there is a way they might meet a poor kid if they do that privileged young person's version of poverty tourism and go build an orphanage in a poor, unsuspecting, developing country to broaden their horizons. I think Prince Harry did that. I'm sure his horizons are very broad. Remember when it was revealed that a lot of those orphanages were a scam, and a really damaging scam as well, so that we're using poor kids to benefit our privileged children's view of the world. I mean, it's beyond revolting. It has no moral... It's morally repugnant, actually, to do that. I have been kicked out of dinner parties for saying that, by the way. There are many problems that come from putting parental choice at the centre of education policy, not least that education is not for parents, but for children, regardless of who their parents are. However, the most egregious is how it turns the purpose of universal, free, compulsory education for every child on its head. Because all parental choice can do is entrench generational privilege and underprivilege. It can do nothing else. And indeed, that is exactly what it has done. But why can it do nothing else? Why is the result so astounding? Well, it's because no child is disadvantaged through any of their own doing. They are disadvantaged and indeed advantaged because they've been born to parents who have either been less or more adept between the private school system and its host public school system. The lifeblood that is being drained is that of our most vulnerable. No education system is ever perfectly equitable. There will be differences to post-COVID impact. Great of educational success globally is not the issue of the school, but the socio-economic background of the family, and interestingly, the education level of the these differences will probably always be with us to a greater extent in the rest of the world. However, perfectly, education has generally been used to try and close inevitable inequalities as adapted as it in Australia. Oh no, we are out now when it comes to using our educational funding, both public and private, to drive those opportunity gaps Indeed, Australia now has the dubious distinction of being one of the OECD countries with the highest concentrations of disadvantaged children in disadvantaged schools. And the OECD is now warning us that that concentration is increasing at the second fastest rate. We are rushing helter-skelter to the bottom. As even Federal Education Minister Jason Clare has admitted, we now have one of the most segregated education systems in the Western world. And it is segregated largely
How are you feeling?
along class lines. You know how we always like to say we're a classless society? Don't make me laugh. For what reason have we divided our children? It's not improved our results. The results of the more privileged children, most of whom have been creamed off from the public school system altogether, have not risen. In fact, they have flatlined. According to education researcher Chris Bonner, there appears to be no academic advantage in gathering all of the better off or better performing kids together. Indeed, I have often, coming from New South Wales, I've often worried about all those bright kids who are in the top class in their mainstream school, who find themselves below average in their selective school, a school they fought so hard to the point of hysterics, mostly on the part of parents, of course, to get into. And being below average, that's 50% of them. And I'm hoping this audience is smart enough to realise that that's inevitable. It has to be like that. It has, however, taken a terrible toll on the academic performance of our most disadvantaged
So it
kids,
says
whose results
Underblue is
have
known as the gateway to the
nosed.
pink lakes.
As Lindsay Connors, retired former Schools Commissioner, pointed out in the 2023 Improving Outcomes for All report, schools become in the public sector, Connors said, 28.9% of schools had concentrations of disadvantage, while the independent school sector had precisely the same 28.9% of schools, but with concentrations of advantage. So we have literally done this. Unsurprisingly, concentrating kids with high educational needs in chronically underfunded schools has a detrimental effect. In fact, it's why so many middle-class parents are deserting public schools. It is creating a vicious cycle. When the media talk about failing schools, they have it us about. It's us, the Australian community, that is failing our schools, not the other way around. Because we've had our fear and our anxiety about our own parenting manipulated into making us choose to leave the schooling system that is open to all and create, therefore, these detrimental effects for the children of families with no choice. Because choice is only available to those with the money to pay for choice.
The impact of school choice on the growing divide in
Australia's education system. Jane Caro is on Big Ideas today. Author, commentator, former advertising executive. ABC Radio National is where you're at. G'day, I'm Natasha Mitchell. And Jane is well known for her advocacy on the issue of public education. She's not holding back in this 2025 Dymphna Clark Lecture at Canberra's Manning Clark House.
The neoliberal ideal of isolating your progeny from the problem kids turns out to have little advantage for them, but cascading problems for the kids you are isolating them from. And again, it's pretty obvious why. You increase needs when you concentrate kids with various difficulties, the mad, the bad and the sad, as I heard one exhausted teacher describe them, and seems the teacher just mentioned, you lose staff as well as role models. You become what is called a hard-to-staff school. You become stigmatised in the community, and kids aren't stupid. They know perfectly well they go to the Povo school and will tell you so. That is the term they use, Povo school. The shame attached to that creates more problems that already exhausted teachers are then blamed for not preventing. And so guess what? They resign, or they seek a transfer. The criticism jobs they often don't like much or actively hate. Their kids would probably be a lot less anxious if they went to the local school and mum and dad were happier, home more and less fragile, exhausted and stressed. We are chasing false gods. Interestingly, most private schools are religious schools. But this may be where we get a clue about how to reverse the vicious cycle brutal, inhuman neoliberalism has created in our schools and replace it with a virtuous one. When I talk to school principals, which I do a lot, I often tell them their major job is not to continuously improve results. Nothing in life continuously improves. Any person who doesn't realise this is still very young and stupid. But the thing they need to do most of all is to reduce parental anxiety. That is the number one task. And the way it works is this. You remember I talked about a vicious cycle that's been created, not just in our schooling system, but I think in our entire society. Here's how to replace it, in my view, with a virtuous students' anxiety goes down, what happens to their teachers' anxiety? Does it go up or does it go down? It goes down. And if teacher anxiety goes down, student anxiety will go further down. If student anxiety goes further down, parental anxiety will go further down. And it becomes self-perpetuating, anxiety-removing process. And of course, because I'm talking to principals and when I talk about this, I say to them, all of this anxiety goes down. Children, parents, teachers, what happens to your anxiety? It goes down too. We're currently hemorrhaging principals because they're being asked to do too much with too little and for too long. I sometimes allow myself to imagine what our country would be like if we were to concentrate on reducing everyone's anxiety. Choice and its handmade neoliberalism drives anxiety, of course, because it demands making decisions. Remember when John Howard wanted us all to change our super funds because we're going to have choice, and absolutely nobody changed their super fund? We didn't want choice. We don't understand our super funds. We just want to be put in a super fund and be able to trust that they're going to do the right thing by us. Anyone tried to put solar on their house recently? Anyone looked at all the providers and wondered how to make a decision? Anyone tried to buy a can of baked beans at a supermarket recently, walked into the supermarket aisle, looked at the number of different types of baked beans you could possibly buy and gone, holy shit, I'll buy some spaghetti. Choice is hard. We don't like no choice, but we like limited choice. Unlimited choice makes us anxious because we keep wondering if we've made the right one. And if it comes to school for our children, that's anxiety up the wazoo. You know, I wish they'd invite me to the economic round table. Fat chance. I'd have told them that the fastest way to increase productivity would be to decrease anxiety and help Australians feel more confident about their own and their children's future. You know, offer them some hope rather than so much fear. A bit of more carrot, less stick. They'd have so much more headspace for work if they were less anxious for community, for parenting, for civic engagement, for creating things and making things, including better relationships and looking after their own home. Health. Reducing anxiety is a win-win, but neoliberalism doesn't like win-wins. It likes win-lose. And I'm allowed to say this on the ABC, but they can edit it out. It likes to drive anxiety too, and so divide and conquer, and to continue to accumulate power to a paranoid few. Exhaustion, anxiety, and the stress created by the view that life is a zero-sum game is a wonderful control mechanism. We're literally too tired to fight it. It always interests me that work demands ramped up just when women went back into the workforce in large numbers. My dad was the CEO of a major company.
Oh, shit.
He was always home by 7 p.m. and never worked on weekends. The company was very profitable. God knows how he did it. It must have been genius. But they all did it like that. Maybe globalisation has made work more competitive and more demanding, or maybe constant inhuman demands that we all continuously improve and get more productive has done that. And of course, running up was also any way to hold women back. The notorious double shift and all that. And that's another thing our obsession with private education has done. Kept our boys and girls away from each other because private schools, especially religious private schools, over 90% of them are, and high fee, I refuse to call them elite.
Turn left, and then turn right. You do this so good. In 200 meters, turn right. There you go. You're getting to be one of the best getaway drivers out there. And then turn right. I love the way you turn right, by the way.
And full of boys-only schools.
Are you turning it off? Hang on.
Cabinet,
Are
where
you
there were
turning